Welcome to the new WIDA Assessment Coordinator video. My name is Jen Paul. I'm the English Learner and Accessibility Assessment Specialist at the Michigan Department of Education. I want to make sure that we are tying this presentation to our English Learner Vision Plan. The Strategic Vision for English Learners is available at www.michigan.gov/MDE-EL. This presentation ties to Goal 1, Objective 1.2. I'm going to be sharing information that helps ensure proper identification of ELs for participation in the continuum of services offered by the local English Learner program, as well as proper exit from English Learner status. Also, it connects to administer annual English language proficiency assessment to all identified English learners. I'd encourage everyone to go out and take a look at the Advancing Equity, a Strategic Vision for English Learners document that's available. You can tie it to your school improvement plans and other areas of need and planning that you are working on to help improve education for your English learners. Let's talk about what your general responsibilities are as an assessment coordinator, and more specifically as an assessment coordinator for the English Learner Assessments, which is the WIDA assessments here in Michigan. You are the point person for communication, the point person to receive communication from MDE, as well as our vendor, DRC, and you are the point person for ensuring that that communication and other needed communication gets to the right people that are going to be doing other things in your districts or buildings, such as doing the test administration themselves. That could also be you, but it's possible that you have a team of people that are going to be helping you do that. Speaking of extra staff and additional folks that you may have helping with your EL assessment endeavors, you are also responsible for ensuring that your staff are trained and have appropriate WIDA certificates. What I mean by WIDA certificates is that you, as well as anyone who's going to be administering the assessments, is required to go through some training. The training is available through the WIDA Secure portal, but the bottom line is everybody that's going to be administering those assessments needs to pass an assessment course. And within that course, there's a quiz, and upon successful completion of that course, as well as the quizzes, you will receive a certificate of completion. So you are responsible for managing not just getting accounts set up for those people that are going to be needing those accounts, but then monitoring to make sure that folks are actually following through on the completion of those courses. I'm going to talk a little bit more about training requirements later on in the video. You are also responsible for obtaining and receiving needed assessment materials and the assessment reports, the results once they come in. I already talked a little bit about ensuring that staff have appropriate accounts. I'm going to go into more detail about which accounts are needed, for what purposes, and how you can go about managing and activating and getting yourself and others set up for those accounts. You do need to work with other appropriate staff in your district and buildings for activities such as technology setup and even pupil accounting. And you absolutely must ensure that the post-testing validation windows and those activities are completed in the OEAA secure site when they are available. So it is not the case that once the summative testing window is over that you have nothing else to do. You do have some continuing responsibilities after those points of time. Let's start with a basic question though. Why do students even take these tests? There's actually a federal requirement outlined in ESSA to identify students as English learners and then assess those English learners on their English language proficiency on a yearly basis. Students must be assessed on listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And this English language proficiency assessment must be based on English language proficiency standards, which are actually distinct and very different from your English language arts standards. This is all in, as I just mentioned, federal law. But in addition to that, These things are in place to ultimately help us make sure that we are serving the right students and giving them the education that they actually need. There are a variety of WIDA assessments. So it's not the case that when we say the WIDA assessment, there is one thing. We're going to start by taking a look at the WIDA screener. This is our first WIDA assessment to understand. All newly enrolling students whose answers to the home language survey, or what we call the HLS, include one yes, must be assessed with the WIDA screener to determine if English language services are even needed. The HLS is a set of questions that must be used during enrollment, and you can find them on this website, which I referenced earlier, www.michigan.gov/MDE-EL. And this is a must be done. You have to have these questions as a part of your enrollment form for all students, not just some students, not just the students that maybe a front office secretary says, that student needs them. No, it is all students who are newly enrolling. If your district and they could be doing this unknowingly, we know that this happens. If a district does do something like individually pick students to fill out the home language survey, that is actually a discriminatory action and would definitely be a civil rights violation. So your screener steps are these right here. Once you figure out who you need to screen based on their answers to the home language survey questions, you screen the students, you give them the WIDA screener, and then you need to make sure that you review what is called the entrance and exit protocol. The entrance and exit protocol document outlines for you what the cut scores are essentially for determining who needs to be an English learner and who doesn't need to be an English learner. That's the whole purpose of the WIDA screener. Let's figure out who's an English learner and who's not. So once you screen the students and you've got a score, you review those scores to see who's in and who's out. However, you do need to enter all scores into the OEAA secure site. You can make a list of which students meet the criteria, keep your running list of which students are definite English learners, and then you need to make sure that that list gets to your pupil accounting staff by fall count day. That's a really important step. And then lastly, you need to make sure that you communicate with your families of those students that you've identified about the services that your school could be offering related to their English language needs. These are all requirements. These are not maybe you need to do this, maybe you should do this. No, these are actually all requirements for what needs to happen at the time of screening. I will say that you should make sure that you do these steps in this order. There is a definite problem with doing them out of sync and out of step. For example, if you screen all the students and you give that list to your pupil accountant, and then you have students who ultimately, based on their scores, you should not be making them English learners. It may be too late. If they've already been entered as English learners in the Michigan Student Data System in MSDS, that's step 4, then they're an English learner for that school year and would be expected to take the summative WIDA assessment. There is unfortunately no easy back button when it comes to how English learners are identified here in the state. So please keep that in mind and please do these things in this order. It will make your life a whole lot easier. So we've talked about the WIDA screener. And as I already mentioned in one of our very first slides, after students take that WIDA screener, and if they are identified as an English learner, they'll be expected to take what's called the Summative WIDA ACCESS for ELLs assessment. Again, this is a federal requirement. Now, there are actually two summative WIDA assessments. We have the WIDA ACCESS for ELLs test, which is for students in grades K through 12. And then we have the WIDA alternate access for ELLs, which is for students in grades 1 through 12 who have or function as if they have a significant cognitive disability. So this would effectively be your M-STEP to my access scenario for your English learners. So you have M-STEP and my access assessments. This is the WIDA access for ELLs is the general education assessment for English learners, and the WIDA alternate access for ELLs, as I mentioned, is for those students with significant cognitive disabilities. So how do you know if a student should be taking this assessment or not? We have guidance available on our website, michigan.gov/WIDA, that you can take a look and check out later. Some more WIDA summative assessment basics. All of these tests, as is required by federal law, are going to assess student skills in listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The screener, the kindergarten assessment, is actually a paper pencil mode assessment, and it does have to be administered one-on-one. There's no way to do it in a group setting. It is not that type of an assessment. However, for grades 1 through 12, the WIDA screener is online, and you could do group administrations with students in the same grade level or grade level clusters. For the summative assessment, the alternate access for ELLs is a paper pencil assessment. However, the access for ELLs is online with the exception of the kindergarten assessment. And for students in grades 1 through 3, they will actually take the writing test via paper pencil. Are there accommodations for these assessments? Yes, there's actually accommodations available for all of them. However, unlike our content area assessments where we have 3 tiers of types of supports, there are no designated supports category within the structure of what's available for these assessments. So you just have universal tools, stuff that's available for everybody, and accommodations, stuff that's only available to students with disabilities and students with 504 plans whose IEPs or 504 plans actually outline a need for that particular accommodation. Do not assign things that are identified as accommodations to students who are not actually identified as a student with disabilities in MSDS. This is something that our office actually monitors. And so if, for example, you were to do that, you might receive an email or a phone call from our office letting you know that we've noticed that in our data, and we might ask you some questions. Why? What happens if you get a new student during one of these WIDA access testing windows? If the student has not been in a Michigan school before, they've never been here at all, you have to screen the student. You cannot skip this step. If they're found eligible, you still must assess them on the WIDA access for ELLs assessment. So it is possible that during the WIDA access assessment window, that student could be screened and then may also have to take the summative WIDA access for ELLs test. What you need to do in those cases, if it does happen, is give students as much time in between the assessments as possible. Now, if the student has been in a Michigan school before, so they've come back and forth perhaps between a different state, they're returning, maybe they were already identified as an English learner, you don't need to screen them. We've already identified them as an English learner. If the student did not yet start testing at their previous Michigan district during the summative window, then follow the process for what is called pre-IDing the student, printing test tickets, and testing the student. If the student started testing already at another Michigan district, ensure that what's called the student transfer form is completed. And you can find directions for completing that form in the WIDA AMS user guide. Now, what happens if you have a student who can't actually take a domain on the assessment? Some students may not actually ever be able to take a specific domain of the assessment. For example, a student who's hearing impaired and uses ASL as their primary mode of communication could be exempt from the listening and speaking domains. However, there's a process to go through to make sure that that can be approved. It's called the WIDA test exception process, and this must be completed through the OEAA secure site. There's guidance on this type of scenario and other scenarios that you can find in a document called the WIDA test exception and false EL guidance, which is available at www.michigan.gov/WIDA. All right, so that was some basic information about these assessments. Let's talk about your initial to-do list. You need to, if you haven't already, sign up for the weekly Spotlight newsletter. That is where you're going to find all of the information on a weekly basis in a timely way that has to do with really all of the state assessments. WIDA will be included in there. So if you just handle WIDA, the best thing to do is scan it on a weekly basis, see if there's anything that says English learner in the title or WIDA in the title. If not, you could probably ignore the rest of it. I'd recommend reading relevant WIDA chapters in the Assessment Coordinator Training Guide. That's available at michigan.gov/WIDA. You'll find an icon for the Assessment Coordinator Training Guide at the top of the page. You must be identified in the Educational Entity Master, the EEM, as your district's English Learner Assessment Coordinator. You have to be identified in that role. That will allow you to then get set up for these required accounts that I'm going to talk about next. So as the assessment coordinator, you will need 3 accounts to administer the WIDA assessments properly. 1 is what we call the WIDA Secure Portal account. 2 is the OEAA Secure Site account. And 3 is WIDA AMS. Yes, you have to have all of them. They are all different logins, and we apologize for that. There are directions about how to get access to each of these in the Assessment Coordinator Training Guide. You will find a chapter for each of them. I would recommend reading them in the order that I have them listed here. You should also take a look at the Michigan Guide to the WIDA Screener. That's available at michigan.gov/WIDA as well. Take a look at the WIDA online checklist. That's available at michigan.gov/WIDA as well. That's for the summative assessment. That may not be available and updated for the current year, depending on when you're viewing this video, but it is certainly a resource that once it is available is a wonderful thing for you to have as you go about tackling your tasks as a coordinator. And then, of course, you need to know who your English learners are in the district. And if you're new to this, you may, again, have to work with your pupil accounting person to pull an entire list for the whole district. Maybe you can do that yourself from your student information system, but you need to know who you have right now. And I would also start digging into what are your current processes, such as do the home language survey questions exist in your enrollment forms? Do you have someone that's going to enter the screener scores into the OEAA secure site? There are a lot of things that you need to find out probably if they are happening and how they might be happening in your district or building. So why these 3 accounts that I just talked about? Let me share with you why you need each one of these and what they do for you. The WIDA Secure Portal account gives you access to the training modules and assessment courses that provide you with that WIDA certificate that you're looking for so that we know that you are approved to actually administer and in some cases actually score these very important assessments. And they do give you access to, this account does give you access to some assessment materials. There are materials for the WIDA screener that you can find in the WIDA Secure Portal. The OEAA secure site is important for identifying students for testing. This allows us to then give our vendor a clean list of information for the students so that you get test booklets with the right name on them, so that they come to the right building, so that you get the right number of materials, etc. It also allows you access to assessment scores and some reports. And then it does also give you access to important testing activities such as the WIDA test exceptions, which I already explained. Things like not tested, which is a post-assessment window process that needs to be completed. WIDA AMS is a whole separate system as well. This gives you access to all of your assessment reports, all of the individual student reports, and it allows you to manage test activities such as putting students in test sessions, printing test tickets, etc., adding accommodations. This is the test management site. We have a new to WIDA document that's available at michigan.gov/WIDA that I'd recommend taking a look at. It's really just going to point you to the relevant chapters of the Assessment Coordinator Training Guide, but it's a nice, easy resource to use. When you do have staff that you might be overseeing to help do test administration activities, when you do have those staff in place, and if they are going to be using the secure site to help do certain testing activities, they need to know that they need to log into the OEAA secure site once every 6 months, or what happens is you lose access to both the OEAA secure site and WIDA AMS. The reason for that is because the only way to get access to WIDA AMS is by having a correct OEAA secure site account. So let me say that one more time. The only way to get a WIDA AMS account is to have an OEAA secure site account. So if you lose access to the OEAA secure site, you lose access to WIDA AMS. That's how that goes. Who are your people? Kind of alluded to this earlier. You need to find out who updates the EEM, the Educational Entity Master, in your district or building, because as I already mentioned, you need to make sure that you are identified in that system as the English Learner Assessment Coordinator for your district or possibly building, but definitely the district if that's your role. You need to find out who manages the OEAA secure site access for your district. Somebody is responsible for enabling certain permissions within that site for folks' account. Who's your technology coordinator? You need to know who that person is to make sure that they're on the ball with paying attention to needed updates for the online assessment system. And who are your pupil accounting staff? Who are those people that are going to help you identify your students who are English learners and then help make sure that those students are even exited properly once you do have assessment results in. There is a list of important dates for this assessment. It's available at michigan.gov/WIDA. What's available is a Google Calendar and a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet may not yet be available, but we will have those two things and two types of calendars with important dates available for you. When they are available, definitely make sure that you get those dates, pay attention to them so that you're not missing these important activities. Required WIDA training. Yes, as I already mentioned, you're responsible for completing some of these assessment courses in the WIDA Secure portal. You're responsible for ensuring test administrators complete courses. You can find those courses in the WIDA Secure portal. You only need to complete appropriate grade levels and assessments that you're going to be administering. So, for example, if you are not going to be administering the kindergarten version of the screener or the summative assessment, you can skip that. You don't need to do it. If you know that you're not going to be administering the alternate access for ELLs, you can skip that. So use your judgment with what you know about who you're going to be administering assessments to. Some of these courses do need to be completed on an annual basis. The rule of thumb is if you have to score the assessment yourself, you are the judge, you're scoring it, you're using a rubric, then you have to complete the course again on an annual basis. Some examples of that are the kindergarten access for ELLs assessment. That is something that is scored on the spot by the test administrator. Whoever's doing that is going to need to recertify and recomplete that course every year. Same thing with the WIDA alternate access for ELLs assessment. It's a one-on-one assessment that's going to need to be, that is scored by the test administrator. So again, whoever's doing that needs to complete that course again. This is the long list of the required WIDA trainings that are available. I have an asterisk next to which ones need that yearly recompletion. I'll pause here for a moment so that you can take a screenshot or take a photo of this screen if you'd like to. There are other required resources that need to be reviewed annually, such as those related to test security. So you need to make sure to check that assessment integrity guide, which is available on any of our assessment web pages, and also check the WIDA Access checklists that will tell you also very specifically and concretely what it is that you need to review and complete on an annual basis. All right, getting ready for that summative WIDA access for ELLs assessment. There's an initial material ordering and pre-ID phase that happens. That's your opportunity to actually order, if you need it, materials such as Braille and enlarged print. Those are the only materials you need to order. You don't need to order test booklets. What ends up happening is if you pre-ID the student, or rather we pre-ID students for you on your behalf, and then you tell us if things are right or wrong and add or remove students, then we will ship you materials based on whoever it is that you have pre-identified on that list. So you will need in December to make sure that you know if you have any students that need Braille or enlarged print so that you can actually order those. And then you also need to find out which students should be taking that WIDA alternate access for ELLs assessment. And then you'll identify them to take what we call Tier T in the OEAA secure site. There's going to be lots of directions and communication about this type of activity. So be on the lookout again for that Spotlight newsletter that provides you with those very detailed directions. So as I mentioned, we're going to tell you who we think is an English learner based on whoever was identified in MSDS as an English learner as a fall count day. That's what we show you in the secure site in December. It's possible that you have students that between fall count day and the time pre-ID opens have left the district. It's very possible. You can remove those students from the pre-ID list so that you don't get materials for them. It's also possible that you've gotten some students who've arrived after count day. Those students may need to be added to your pre-ID list. Completing the adds removes by the end of December ensures that students that are no longer in your district don't show up in WIDA AMS. We don't want them there. You don't need to manage students in WIDA AMS who you don't even have anymore, or even get materials for those students. That might make things very confusing, especially if you've got test administrators who may not be familiar with all of your students. You want to know who you're supposed to test when the window opens. So you do your pre-IDing and ordering if you need to do that. You give the assessment, and then you have post-test verification windows. Those are what we call verification of enrollment and demographics, answer documents received, and students not tested. You need to do these things and make sure that you look at them in the OEAA secure site. These windows are the only opportunity for you to correct things like there is no EL identification in MSDS for a student, and that results in a non-score for a student, an NA. So in this scenario, you tested the student, but no one actually identified them in MSDS as an English learner. We invalidate those test results at the state because the student looks to us like they were not an English learner and should not have been taking this assessment. So in the springtime, we show you the list of students that tested and tell you whether or not they're an English learner or not in MSDS. So we're giving you the information and telling you, check it out, make sure that this is correct. If not, fix it. By the time you get test results in August, then it's too late to fix anything. So if you've gotten a score that says NA, and it's because the student was not identified as an English learner, there's nothing we can do about it at that point in time. It also lets you find potentially missing tests. That's your only opportunity to do that. Again, once August rolls around and we have results, things are too late for us to try and find documents with our vendor. You need to do it in the springtime. It also is your only opportunity to correct student information. Perhaps in MSDS, which can happen, the student's name had been mistyped. So your reports are going to have a student's mistyped name on them as well. So you would be able to update that type of information. And then also it allows you to provide reasons for why a student may not have tested. Sometimes there are valid reasons. Perhaps a student had a significant injury that resulted in them being hospitalized, and therefore they really truly were not able to be tested during the testing window. That's potentially a valid reason for a student to not have to test, and therefore you to not be penalized for not testing the student in the accountability system. But you have to take that opportunity that we give you to tell us why the student tests. And that window of time happens in the spring during the student's not tested window. So you're going to get these results in August. Where do you find these reports? At least you're going to get the August reports for your summative assessment. Your WIDA screener reports are actually available to you anytime you want once you've screened students, more or less. Once you enter scores into the OEAA secure site, you can then print individual student reports and roster reports. If you're in WIDA AMS, so for any student that's in grades 1 through 12 that's going to be testing, they have reports available to them in WIDA AMS already. You need to put those reports, once you have them, those individual student reports, in the student's CA60 or permanent record file. You need to make sure that you've got a record that you followed through on these federal requirements that say, yep, you actually screened the student. There is a hard copy of the WIDA Access for ELLs reports, so the summative assessment, that is shipped to districts. You do have access to a downloadable student data file, so an Excel spreadsheet in the OEAA secure site. That's for the summative access for ELLs assessment. That is very handy, and I like to promote that as a really great resource for folks to use. That's available. And then also, if your district is a MyLearn district, access for ELLs, the WIDA Access for ELLs assessment and the alternate access for ELLs assessment results are also in MyLearn. So you're going to get these test results for the Access for ELLs assessment. What do they mean? The WIDA Interpretive Guide for Score Reports provides explanations and examples for you to check out. You can find that at the WIDA website. So wida.wisc.edu. There's no www in front of that. What are you supposed to do with these scores once you have them and understand that you have things like scale scores and proficiency levels? What do you do with this stuff? You need to ensure that students who achieve proficiency are exited from their EL status in your student information system. The state does that on your behalf in MSDS. We exit students who reach proficiency in MSDS for you. However, it is the case that that information does not necessarily travel back into your student information systems directly. Somebody at the local level still needs to make sure that their student information system is updated to reflect that the student is exited so that you don't re-identify the student again as an English learner for the following school year, because that's not what you want to have happen. You don't want to be testing students unnecessarily and keeping them in services and programs for which they do not need. So you get these scores, you exit them, great. What else do you do with them? You should be making instructional program decisions with them. Do you have patterns across buildings or even within specific buildings as to how students are potentially scoring that might make you change what and how you're going to be doing instruction for the next year? These are questions that you want to take a look at. You can also take a look at statewide WIDA Access for ELL scores at myschooldata.org. And then where do you look for more information when you need it? You can always go to michigan.gov/WIDA or the WIDAWISC.edu webpage. And I apologize, there should not be a www. In front of that URL for WIDA.WISC.edu. Find those checklists when they're available at michigan.gov/WIDA. Those are for the summative assessments. There is a screener checklist at the end of the Michigan Guide to the WIDA screener, but it's certainly not as robust and comprehensive as the summative checklists that are available. Make sure you get the Michigan-specific test administration manual for the WIDA Access for ELLs assessment when it's available. The reason for that is because a lot of times the WIDA assessment, because it is used by 40 plus other states, it's a generic test administration manual and it is not specific to Michigan. So many times it will tell you that you can do things. The generic manual is going to tell you you can do something that you can't actually do here in Michigan. So that's why it's important to get those checklists, the Michigan-specific checklists and the Michigan-specific test administration manual. It will really help you out. Make sure you grab the WIDA AMS user guide and get those WIDA important dates on your calendar when they're available. I just kind of talked about this. Why can't I do what those directions told me to do? Might be because you don't have correct permissions in the system, or perhaps you're reading the generic consortium material. That is usually the case. Can parents opt out of testing? MDE and OEAA does not have an opt-out process for assessments. Schools are obligated by federal law to offer English learner services to any students who qualify as English learners. Parents can decline the EL services, but not the assessment. Schools are still obligated to assess the students on the WIDA screener, the WIDA Access, the WIDA alternate access for ELLs assessments. To help you in some of these endeavors with parents who might find some of this challenging or may also feel really targeted at times, we do have a couple parent guides in translated versions that are available. There's one in English, there's one in Arabic, and one in Spanish. And these essentially just help parents really understand what these assessments are, that they are not discriminatory. They're designed to help students ultimately. So please use those resources. Other than that, when you've got questions, who are you going to call? Jen Paul. But please send me an email, paulj@michigan.gov, when you have WIDA assessment related questions. Thank you.